to the CPUC's YouTube channel. So just want to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded, and I just started the recording now. So welcome everybody. Thanks for taking some time out to attend this meeting. I think some of you, based on looking at who's attending right now, looks like a few of you may have participated in our noon meeting today, which is great. Good to have you back. The presentation, as I think you all know, is going to be the same. However, the Q&A could be different because we have different people participating in this evening's meeting who weren't on the noon meeting. And so my name is Tom Engels, and I'll sort of formally introduce myself in a bit here. I'm a consultant for the CPUC, and I'll be helping lead this meeting, and Rob Peterson from the CPUC is also on. But this is a meeting for the CPUC's public meeting for the draft environmental impact report on the Estrella, the proposed Estrella substation and Paso Robles area reinforcement project. The draft EIR was published on December 8th and is now out for public review and comment. And the public review period is going to last until February 1st at 5 p.m. It'll close. And we'll talk during this meeting about how you can provide written comments. The project is being proposed jointly by the Horizon West Transmission, which is a company, an energy company, and Pacific Gas and Electric Company. So let's go ahead and get going. Let's first just talk about some Zoom features, some just basic Zoom features. So at the bottom of your screen or top of your screen, somewhere on your screen, hopefully, depending on the device you're using, there will be some icons that say chat, raise hand, or Q&A. We have disabled the chat icon, so just to keep things more manageable so that we don't have multiple dialogue boxes going simultaneously. Instead, we're going to have the Q&A box. If you click on that, you can type in questions for us, and if we have time, we'll read the question aloud at the end of the presentation and do the best that we can to provide a response if we can. It may be that we just ask you to provide your comments in written format, and we'll explain how to do that. If you would like to speak at the end of the presentation, raise your hand at any time during the presentation, and we'll call on you. At the end of the presentation, I'll unmute you. Right now, everybody is muted except for myself. And if you want to speak, I will call your name and then ask to unmute yourself. So that's kind of those are the features of Zoom right now. So pretty simple. Raise hand if you want to talk at the end. The Q&A box to type in questions that you might have. And just know that the chat feature is disabled. So the meeting is going to cover a lot of things. We're going to start with the meeting format. We've already touched a little bit on that, but we've got a little bit more to talk about. Then we're going to talk about the purpose and goals of the meeting, the roles of various individuals and parties in this process, including the roles, my role, the role of CPUC, and the role of the project applicants, PG&E and Horizon West Transmission. Then Rob is going to talk a little bit about the CPUC process for projects like this. And then we'll talk about the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. I'll be using the acronym CEQA. And CEQA is really why we're all here at this meeting. Is CEQA says to do environmental impact type reports like we're doing right now for this project, or similar other types of documentation for projects in the state of California. Then we'll go on to talking about the actual proposed project. This is the project being proposed not by CPUC. I want to make sure that that's clear. CPUC is not proposing this project. The project is being proposed by PG&E and Horizon West Transmission. We'll then talk about alternatives. We evaluated a lot of alternatives in the draft EIR. We did an environmental analysis on the proposed project as well as these alternatives. And then at the end, We'll let you know how you can submit comments on the draft EIR, written comments by email or by mail. And if we have time, we'll open it up for people to speak. And we'll also try to address some of the questions in the Q&A box. Again, this Zoom call is being recorded. The presentation slides for this presentation right now are available right now on the project website. Presenters will include Rob Peterson from CPUC, myself, along with my coworkers, Patrick Donaldson and Julie Allison. And the three of us are with Horizon Water and Environment. We're an environmental consulting firm under contract with the CPUC to assist CPUC in the preparation of this environmental impact report. I do want to note that we're not affiliated with Horizon West Transmission, despite somewhat the commonality of the word Horizon in our company's names. We're a different firm, and we're an environmental consulting firm versus an energy firm. Again, everyone is muted during the presentation. If you'd like to speak, raise your hand, ask a question, use the Q&A button. And at the end, again, depending on how much time we have, we will call on people individually, and I'll unmute them so that they can speak for up to 2 minutes if time permits. So the purpose of this meeting is to provide all of you with an overview of the proposed project and the draft EIR that was prepared on the proposed project, and also provide an opportunity for informal questions and answers. But one thing I do want to stress throughout this entire presentation is that written comments, if you have comments, substantive comments on the draft EIR, we really encourage you to submit your comments in writing to the Estrella project at Horizon H2O, or send them by mail. And I'll provide you with that address at the end of the presentation. And the goals, we're hoping at the end of the meeting, by the end of the meeting, you'll be aware of what this project is all about, why it's being proposed, how the CPUC evaluated the environmental impacts of the project, what the environmental impacts are, and what were some of the bigger impacts, and also so that you understand what all of the alternatives are as well. And then also to ensure that everyone knows how to submit written comments on the draft EIR. I'm going to turn this over now to Rob, again, project manager with the California Public Utilities Commission, to talk about the CPUC's process.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. So as Tom mentioned, Horizon, our consultant, and I'm representing the Public Utilities Commission, and our role is to review a project as proposed by utilities we regulate. In this case, the applicants are PG&E and Horizon West Transmission. Their role would be to construct and operate the project if approved. And again, they propose the project. It's a common misconception that the PUC is involved with proposing the project or constructing and operating, and that's not the case. The PUC either approves or rejects the projects, and we do the environmental review. So the process begins when a utility company that we regulate submits an application. In this case, it was a permit to construct application, and it's pursuant to our general order 131D, which describes that process. So Horizon West and PG&E filed their application, which is number A1701023. It's good to have that number in mind. It is on our project website and several places in these slides. That number is useful to navigate to the proceeding page, where you can track the formal proceeding which takes place as one of the processes during the PUC's review. The other process is the environmental review process, which is what we're here representing today. In addition to the application, a proponent's environmental assessment is filed. The application and PEA, as we call it, were filed in January 2017. And then there was a process of getting more data until deeming the application complete. And there was a revised PEA filed at one point as well. So as I mentioned, there's two tracks: the CEQA environmental review tract, the formal proceeding track. and then ultimately the CPUC has authority to approve or deny the application. Tom? So here, this figure shows in graphical format much of what was conveyed on the prior slide. You'll see that in the middle at the top, it shows when an application is filed, how it begins 2 processes. On the right is the formal proceeding. It's got a peach-colored downward-facing arrow, and that proceeding hasn't moved very far. The application has been docketed. There are some parties to the proceedings, the proceeding, and there's some other basic information there. But the judge has decided to not move forward with the next step, which is the pre-hearing conference, until the draft environmental impact report is circulated. The DEIR has now been circulated, and then you look at the other column there, you can see we're now collecting comments on the draft EIR. So that those comments are due up through February 1st. Once we've received all our comments and taken the feedback, we'll prepare the final environmental impact report and then submit that back to the judge, who will write the proposed decision. So the proposed decision will take into consideration the staff process, which is the environmental review, and also all the information that came out through the courtroom-led proceeding, which is a formal, there's an assigned office as well, and generally there are lawyers involved, the applicants are engaged, and some other formal, generally participants, sometimes a county or a city, things like that, generally not individual residents. So when the proposed decision is written, there's 30 days comment, and then ultimately all 5 commissioners will vote on a decision to approve the project, some version of the project, maybe with an alternative, or to deny the project. Thank you, Tom.
Sure. So what we're going to talk about now is the left part of this screen that Rob just talked about, the CEQA process. And what is CEQA? And again, CEQA stands for the California Environmental Quality Act. It's been around since 1970. And the real overarching purpose of CEQA is to disclose what public agencies are doing, what projects are they approving, what are the environmental impacts of these projects, are there ways to minimize environmental impacts of the project. And there are different ways that you can potentially minimize environmental damage. One is through what are called mitigation measures, where you say, okay, you can build the project, but there are some additional steps that you need to take to make sure that potential impacts to the environment are minimized. Or you could even choose an alternative project. And when I use the word alternative, I'm talking about an entirely different way, potentially, of accomplishing the stated objectives of the project. And so that's just an entirely different way that beyond mitigation measures that CEQA says you can potentially avoid or minimize damage to the environment. And ultimately it all comes down to disclosure. And I really want to make sure that everyone is aware of the project web page. I think most people are. We'll have the web page address at the end of this, but you probably got it in your notices. There's a lot of information on that web page, not just the draft EIR, but if you really follow through that web page, you'll see the step-by-step process that has been undertaken by CPUC during this review of the project. And so there's been a lot of correspondence back and forth. There have been interim reports, one in particular for an alternatives screening report that went out for public review and was ultimately finalized and is contained as an appendix in the draft EIR. But there have been many steps during this process, and some of you I may have even met back when we did the scoping meeting at the very beginning of this EIR process, before we had written a single sentence of the draft EIR. Rob and Patrick and Julie, we were all down in Paso at a school doing a scoping report and had a pretty good attendance. I believe there were about 80 people there. So we've been reaching out to the community for input. This step that we're at right now with the draft EIR, this is a big step. This is where we're really reaching out and saying, we'd like your thoughts. What are your comments, your concerns on the draft EIR? So let's sort of start where it all begins, and that is why are the applicants proposing this project in the first place? And it really comes down to two objectives, as described in the draft EIR, what we're calling the transmission objective and the distribution objective. Now, the language in this first objective is complicated. I know that. And I want to be able to talk about what this transmission objective means in the coming slides. So hang on with that. But just before we even go further, just understand that transmission lines, when you think of transmission lines, those are lines that are carrying a lot of voltage. They're higher voltage lines. Technically, they're above 50 kilovolts, kV. Distribution lines are much lower voltage, below 50 kV. Those are the ones that end up at the end user, the homes and the businesses. So there's two things going on here. One is improving the transmission grid in the Paso Robles area, and also the distribution grid. And so let's look at this transmission objective in another way, and that is by looking at a figure of what's out there right now, what's out on the ground. We're not talking about the proposed project yet. We're just saying what is out there right now in the region. So right here in the middle is the Paso Robles substation. It's pretty much located downtown, completely surrounded on all sides by urban development. There are stores, there's a tire store, at least there was the last time I was there, just right next door to it. There's a road that goes right by it. And so this is kind of downtown Paso right here where my cursor is hovering over. There's also these lines, these blue and lavender lines that you see on the right side. These are transmission lines. So they're the higher voltage lines. One is a 500 kV, that's very high voltage. The other one is a 230 kV transmission line. And it's really this 230 kV line that this project wants to somehow create another tap into. Right now, you'll see down in the Templeton substation, it, not surprisingly, is located right along this big alignment here, these lines. So it taps into there and goes along this lower voltage, still a transmission line, 70 kilovolts, but this lower voltage, which carries electricity up into the Paso Robles community and the surrounding area. And so one of the things that this project is aiming to do is address a problem that might occur if there was a transformer failure at this substation, the Templeton substation, or if this portion of the existing 70 kV line had a failure. For example, somebody drives a car into a pole and this line fails or falls, or something happens at this transformer. In that event, the reliability of electricity up in this area will go down. We have a problem. Suddenly we have a problem with the energy grid, the availability of electricity for people in this area. So the idea is to figure out, is there another way that we can provide another tap into this line or something that could offset that failure? And that's really the goal of this project when it comes to the transmission. Now, the distribution objective, there's also a need to address the distribution need with shorter lines and things like that. And so we'll be talking about these, how do you solve this problem? How do you solve this? And it's really a risk. It's just the risk that you could have a big power outage up in this area because of either this 70 kV line goes down or the Templeton transformer goes down.
Tom, I'll just add a point here. So we look, in addition to the option of creating a new 70 kV line, tapping into the 230 kV line Tom described, we look carefully at battery storage alternatives. We looked at pretty large battery storage alternatives. It could have replace could have been an alternative to building a 70 kV line. But there was a challenge here we discovered, and that is that the line to San Miguel doesn't have a very high capacity. So if the 70 kV line to the south, the Templeton, were to fail, or the transformer as Tom described, there wouldn't be enough power from the north to not only provide power to the local area, but also to recharge the battery so that enough power can be provided. And this, we're planning for a peak time frame during the summer where people are running their air conditioners. And so this concept, the issue of recharging this battery was really the challenge. And we found that doing a battery storage alternative for the transmission objective would not be feasible, and we didn't carry it forward for full analysis. We did, however, find that it could be feasible to address the distribution need with battery storage or another type of distributed energy resource. And we'll get into that just a little bit later.
All right, just a couple other things. This is Highway 46. I just want to make sure everyone is kind of oriented and knows where they're at. This is Highway 101, this black line here, and then the Templeton substation is here, and then up off the map to the north is the San Miguel substation. So let's talk about the draft EIR. It's a little intimidating for somebody that just crack open and start reading, because it is a long document. And I just want to, it's all available on the project webpage. We've got it even broken out so that you don't have to download the whole thing. It is long. Just the first 8 sections here are about 1,000 pages. That doesn't include the appendices, which are pretty lengthy themselves. But so we have an introduction that just kind of introduces this whole draft EIR. What's the purpose? What's it about? Why are we doing it? Then a chapter 2 that talks about the proposed project. This is what the 2 applicants, PG&E and Horizon West Transmission, are proposing. Then we talk about alternatives. These are alternatives that have been identified by various means. Some of them may look familiar from conversations some of you have had with PG&E years ago. Others may look completely new. These are ones that the CPUC CEQA review team have identified. And so there's a whole mixture. And as Rob said, there are battery storage alternatives that are discussed in there as well to meet the distribution need, not the transmission need, but the distribution need. The environmental impact analysis itself, this is a big section of the EIR, because it is here that we do the environmental impact assessment, so to speak, of not only the proposed project, but of all of the alternatives. And in the next slide, I'm going to show you why that section is so big, because we look at the effects of the proposed project as well as the alternatives on everything from visual resources, aesthetics, to cultural resources, to biological resources, noise impacts, air quality impacts, wildfire. I mean, there's a long list, as you'll see in the next slide. And then in chapter 5, this is kind of where we've done all the work. We've identified all the alternatives. We've described the project. It's the proposed project itself. We've talked about all of the impacts. Now let's just sort of see what are some conclusions we can make. And this includes saying which alternatives seem to fare better when it comes to impacts to the environment. Some are more, let's just say, damaging to the environment than some of the other alternatives. And then we talk about some other things that are required by CEQA in chapter 6. And then there's a report preparers who wrote this, the references section, and then the appendices. So this is the chapter 4 that I was talking about. It's a big section of the draft EIR. It's broken out into 20 sections. They're in alphabetical order in terms of the environmental resource topic. Aesthetics is basically visual impacts, aesthetic impacts, not only of the substation itself, but the lines, the power lines, and not only for the proposed project, but for all of the alternatives as well. And then all of these other resource topics. So there's a lot to go through. We've broken out on the website each of these sections so that you don't have to, download the whole chapter 4 if you're not interested in, let's say, transportation, but would rather jump right to biological resources, then you can do that. So the proposed project is summarized in a very simplistic way on this slide. And so there are 3 components of the proposed project. The Estrella substation, which is right here, again, not surprisingly, located right along this 500 kV and more importantly, more applicably, the 230 kV lines right here. And then the power line, which is this aqua colored line here, which would then connect up to the existing 70 kV transmission line here. And then there's what's called reconductoring. This is about a 3-mile segment here. This is essentially kind of upgrading the existing lines and poles. Some of the poles need to be replaced. And the lines themselves need to be replaced with better lines, and so there are already poles here, as those who live or are familiar with this area. There are already telephone poles, already poles here, power line poles and lines, but the idea is to replace some of these poles and to upgrade the line. So we talked about the project objectives. There were 2 identified in the draft EIR. Again, the distribution as well as the transmission line components. And so when you take the project that is being proposed and break it up into its components, its physical components, it really comes down to the new substation that they're proposing, the Estrella substation, which would be located along Union Road, and we'll talk about that later. And then the power line components, which I just showed on the previous slide. That was the aqua new line. That's a new power line, transmission line, that would then connect up with the existing 70 kV line that went north-south, and then also the reconductoring component. Then there are various components which we're calling reasonably foreseeable and potentially future components. These are things that aren't needed now, or according to the applicants, aren't necessarily needed now, but might be needed down the road a few years. The top part is probably more foreseeable. And this includes some additional what are called feeders from the new substation and transformer, things like that. And then maybe way down the road, not sure if it's going to happen, when or how or what, some additional 70 kV lines. But this is starting to get into like very long term, not very sure what this might entail.
Before you go to the next slide, I might just add, so the reasonably foreseeable distribution components, interesting phrasing. And the reason it's phrased that way is that when the application was filed, there was a forecast that assumed these distribution components would be needed within what they call the planning horizon. But a new forecast is done every year. And this year, PG&E found that there was no need for the distribution components, and there wouldn't be they predict for 5 to 15 years, so possibly even outside this typical 10-year planning horizon. So there's still room inside the substation to construct these distribution components, and if needed, there would be 1.7 miles of new distribution line approximately, and about 8 miles of reconductoring. But they're reasonably foreseeable, 5 to 15 years, but they're not currently wouldn't immediately be constructed according to the current forecast.
That previous slide that talked about ultimate substation build out, the things way down the road. So what would that look like at the substation, the new Estrella substation that is being proposed? Well, we've broken that out in this graphic. There are 3 different colors. there's black, there's blue, and there's green. What is shown in black, and you can see it if you're seeing my cursor, there's black right there, there's black right there. This whole area is black, and we have black up here. These are the proposed components. These are what would be built if this project is approved. They would, that would be part of the construction underway. The blue components are what we called the future distribution components. Some of this would be above ground, some of it below. And you see that that's here and here. And then the green, these are the ultimate substation build out. This is the way down the road, might happen, might not. And that's in green, and it's here, here, and here. And as Rob pointed out in our earlier meeting, one of the reasons we've been looking at battery storage is to see, is there a way that this blue could become unnecessary, these future distribution components. And so that's one thing that when we were looking at battery storage, one of the things that came up. Rob, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Sure, I'll add a few points. First of all, just note Neat West, when they filed the application, that was the name of the company. They have since changed their name to Horizon West. So Neat West and Horizon West are the same company. This particular slide shows that in the green side of the substation, the green perimeter, that's the side that Horizon West will construct. And then the blue side perimeter here is the side that PG&E will construct. In addition, they will construct the 70 kV lines that come out of the substation. So Tom mentioned that the reasonably foreseeable distribution components are in blue, so here and there, as he said. So when we talk about the battery storage alternatives, what we found is that if in the future the need for the distribution components returns, that it would be environmentally superior, as I'm skipping ahead a bit, to build distributed energy resources if possible. And so that would be either battery storage, but it could be solar with battery storage, could be energy efficiency. 5 to 10 years, 15 years is a fairly long time. Technologies could change even. We tried to be technology neutral. So we looked at lithium ion batteries as well as flow batteries. Flow batteries are two containers that contain chemicals that when the chemical passes between the two, it either discharges energy or it can be recharged in the same way. So chemicals passing between two different containers, flow battery. So we looked at those options, but at this time, it's not clear when or if the distribution need would return.
Great. So if you're wondering what this new substation, the proposed Estrella substation would look like, again, this would be along Union Road. This is an artist's rendering of the new substation, what it would look like if you were just driving down the road, driving down Union Road. This would be the new substation here. So it's about 15 acres, if I remember correctly. So I don't want to bog down the meeting with a discussion of all of the impacts to the environment of the proposed project or the alternatives. It would take forever to go through all of that because there are a lot of impacts. But many of those impacts, we found mitigation measures that could reduce those impacts to what we call less than significant. This is terminology from CEQA. One of the focuses of CEQA is to figure out which impacts are, quote, significant and which impacts are less than significant. And we found quite a few impacts that were significant. However, we identified proposed mitigation measures that would reduce those significant impacts to a less than significant level. There were some resources where we still, even with mitigation, still had we couldn't go below that significance threshold. So these are what we call significant and unavoidable impacts. They have to do with aesthetics. Those are visual impacts, impacts not only of the new substation, but also of the power lines themselves, those as well. Agricultural resources, what this really comes down to is the loss of prime farmland due to the construction of the substation, as well as rather small, but they accumulate losses of prime farmland from the installation of the new poles. And then there are some emissions, air quality emissions that are still significant. That's not surprising. It doesn't take much to go above that significance threshold, and it's very difficult to pull that down into less than significant. And these are emissions from construction, not from the operation of the new substation and the power lines, but from the construction of the substation and installation of the power lines. And then there are some noise impacts, and those noise impacts are primarily because of noise from helicopters as they are lowering the new poles down to the installation site. These are rather temporary impacts in the grand scheme of things. Clearly, the air quality and noise impacts would go away once the project has been constructed. This slide is a very busy slide. However, I think it's a very useful slide. It contains an awful lot of information that is helpful for many of the slides later in this presentation when we start talking about, when we show figures that show the proposed project, or show all of the different alternatives that we evaluated in the project. So, you know, the aqua blue, whenever you see aqua blue, you know, oftentimes you just think immediately, okay, this has something to do with what's being proposed. The proposed project itself, that means the Estrella substation and the transmission lines and the reconductoring. The center area of this slide is color coded for all of these different alternatives. So these are all alternatives that were evaluated in the draft EIR. Now, having said that, I want to make it clear that some of these alternatives are not standalone alternatives, so that by themselves, they would not solve both project objectives. So you have to start pairing up or combining some of these alternatives so that both of those two objectives that we talked about towards the beginning of the presentation are both met. On the right side here in black, there are alternatives that we considered but we dismissed for various reasons. They weren't feasible for a variety of reasons. And so those were just outright dismissed at the onset of the draft EIR. And I do want to make it clear to everybody that the reason why all of these alternatives were dismissed, that's explained in the draft EIR. The reason why these were carried forward is explained in the EIR. So it's all contained in that alternatives chapter, chapter 3, which is a big chapter, but it's because it has a lot of figures. So as I indicated in the last slide, we came up with a lot of alternatives, quite a few, and we analyzed them individually on their own in chapter 4 of the draft EIR. But as I said, also, many of these alternatives do not by themselves meet completely both of those project objectives. And so because of that, we've had to pair them up or combine them, maybe with another alternative, and in many cases with two other alternatives. To have a complete package. And then so if you want to know, well, all right, you've told me what these alternatives are. What's the bottom line? What are the combinations? What's the full package of these combinations? That's all described in chapter 5. So the idea is each of these combinations of alternatives would meet both project objectives. So what are those alternative combinations? Well, here they are. And what we have is, I know this is difficult to read on your computer screen. Again, we are going to have the slides are available on the website, but we're going to zoom in. In the next slide, we're going to look at the northern portion, and then we're going to look at the southern portion, and then the slide after that. But this slide by itself gives you kind of the whole big picture of all of the different alternatives. Again, here in the middle, This is the proposed Estrella substation right here. This is the proposed transmission line. And this is the proposed reconductoring that would take you down to the Paso substation. This black line represents an alternative that was dismissed. That's why it's colored black. Another alternative to take, we're going to be talking about more, is one that would actually involve building the Estrella substation, but instead of putting the transmission line along this corridor, it would run the transmission line up and then cut across to the west, and then meet up with the existing 70 kV line and pull it all the way down to the Paso Robles substation. There's an alternative down in the south. We call this the South River Road alternative. This alternative involves doing some expansion at the existing Templeton substation and then putting in a 70 kV line that goes up, kind of paralleling the those big power lines that I talked about earlier that exist already, and then would go along South River Road and then up to the Paso Robles substation. So there's others, there's like variations on the theme here. You can see there's another potential way of making this connection all work up in the north, the northeast. You'll see some purple lavender right here. That represents some undergrounding of the 70 kV line. So rather than having overhead lines, there would be some, this portion of the line would be put underground. And just so that everyone's kind of situated, and we'll have sharp, better, closer ups here, but this is the San Antonio Winery right here. This is kind of the Germain, Wisteria, Golden Hill Road area up here. You might see every once in a while little stars here. These are just battery storage facility potential. They're just example sites, you know, places where you could, for example, put a battery storage facility. These are not being proposed. They're just example sites, just show where such facilities could in fact go. Anything I missed here, Rob?
No, Tom, I think you covered it all. Maybe move on to the next one.
All right, so let's go north, zoom in on the north, and this is where we look at most of the alternatives. There's one to the south, which we'll talk in the next slide, but here again is the proposed substation, the proposed 70 kV line. Here are those lavender lines that are the alternatives that involve undergrounding the power line in this part of the project. This would be reconductoring here. Once you get down here, this green line represents kind of what we call the northern route or the Estrella route, and would go quite a bit far north of downtownish area of Paso, which is, you know, down here. Different variations. This is just another variation on the theme of this northern route. There's also an alternative that looks at, instead of building the substation here, building it up here, and we call that the Bennell Ranch substation. So yeah, this kind of covers most of the, I believe I captured most of this. So we'll go south. This is simpler because there's only one alternative that we didn't rule out, and that is this, what we call the South River Road alternative, which involves a combination of an expansion of the existing Templeton substation plus a new line that would come up and then go along South River Road up to the existing Paso substation. When we were done with our environmental impact analysis, we had fully evaluated the impacts of the proposed project, as well as all of the alternatives. And now I'm talking about not only just the alternatives, but the combinations of the alternatives. We then asked ourselves, among all of these combinations, which one is what is called the environmentally superior alternative combination. Which one would result in least damage to the environment? And the answer to that was what were called alternative combination number 2. This is the Estrella route, which and includes not the Bennell substation that I showed earlier up in the far northeast, but the Estrella substation, this green line, 70 kV line, that then cuts up north and goes across, meets up with the existing 70 kV line, and then comes back down to the Paso substation. And then battery storage as well. All of these combinations include battery storage. So you'll see some, these are just purple, these stars are just, again, these are just example sites. They're not being proposed, and we're not proposing putting a battery storage facility up by the airport. It's just an idea, something to think about. It could go there. So now that you know the environmentally superior alternative, in other words, the one that ranked first as being alternative combination number 2, that being what we commonly just referred to the Estrella route or the northern route, that the Estrella substation plus the northern route and battery storage. How did the other combinations fare? Well, here's the list. Number 1 is the environmentally superior. Number 2 is the one next in line, 3, 4 down to 6. 6 being this one performed the worst. The impacts, the environmental impacts were the most severe of all of the alternative combinations. So the South River Road alternative combination fares the worst from an environmental standpoint. The Bennell Ranch alternative, this is the one where I showed on figure that instead of building the substation at the proposed site, the Estrella substation, you build the substation way up to the north and east. This one didn't fare too well either. Proposed project came in number 4. Alternative combination number 5 and number 1. These are variations of the proposed project. So this number 3 is the proposed project, but it includes what Rob had used the term distributed energy resources, which includes things like battery storage or solar or combinations of battery and solar, things like that. So that ranked number 3. Ranked not coming in at number 2 was the alternative combination that is the proposed project with undergrounding. And this is where we, you remember those lavender lines in one of the earlier figures where we showed that a portion of that 70 kV line up in the area of the San Antonio winery is underground. So I think that one question that has come up for a lot of people, I haven't looked at the Q&A. I see that we've already got a few questions in there. I haven't had a chance to look at those yet, but one question that repeatedly comes up is, where is my house or home or business or wherever in relationship to the proposed project, the power lines, or any of these alternatives? And if you go onto the project website, there is an interactive web map that when you click on that link, you'll see something like this. You won't see this over on the right side yet until you click map type, which is this icon right here. And then you can choose what your background is. In this case, I chose the background to be aerial photograph with labels. So if you zoom in, you start seeing more detail. Or you could just have strictly aerial photography, the aerial photograph of the area. Or you can choose streets if you're interested in streets. Lots of different base maps. If you're only interested in a certain alternative, you can turn the other alternatives off. The default is that all of everything is shown. And that's why this shows you everything. You have the South River Road down here, you have the proposed project here, you've got the northern route, the Estrella route, everything is on this map. You can turn different layers off if you want. And then the legend you can just click on and it'll appear over here to remind you what these colors all stand for.
Tom, I'll just add, so in the chat menu, or in the chat, I added the project website link and also a link to this interactive map. And that it is very easy to put in your address in that search bar and find out where your property may be located in.
Oh, yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Up here in the search bar, you can type in your address. So you could type in, 101 Main Street, Paso Robles, California, and it'll zoom right into your home address. Or you can do it manually. You'll see up here, there's a plus and minus up here. That can zoom in or out. I tend to just use my mouse, which has kind of a wheel on it, that allows me to zoom in and zoom out with just my mouse without having to rely on these. And then you can click your mouse and hold as you click and move the map around. Hopefully that makes sense. If you're having problems with this map and how to use it, send us an email at estrellaproject@horizonh2o.com. This is, I think, a very helpful map, though, that you can use. It's up on the project website. So the final EIR, we're in the public comment period right now. This public comment period will end on February 1st of next year at 5 p.m. And then once that public comment period closes, the CPUC will begin preparing the final EIR. And then, so what will the final EIR contain? It will contain copies of all comments received, be them emails or things sent by snail mail or FedEx, however you sent your comments. We'll have copies of all those in the final EIR. We'll also have written responses to comments that raise issues about the draft EIR or the alternatives, whatever it might be. And then if there are any changes made to the draft EIR based on the comments and the responses, those will also be in the final EIR.
And Tom, before you go to the next slide, which I believe is when we'll start Q&A, one of the questions we typically get is about schedule. And I failed to mention this earlier, so I'll bring it up now. So what's happened in this case is the formal proceeding, the judge presiding over it, has said he would start his proceeding once our draft EIR circulates, and it has now circulated. So we can make some guesses. There are a lot of variables here, but about schedule going forward. It seems likely then that the formal proceeding will start in earnest sometime next year, probably before the summer. And those formal proceedings tend to take at least a year or sometimes quite a bit longer. And so it's hard to know when it might end or what the steps, all the different milestones that may occur as that scope and schedule are set by the judge in coordination with the assigned office. One of the commissioners is assigned. So if we were just making a best guess at when an approval or denial of this project could occur, the earliest time frame is sometime in 2022. And so if something was approved for construction, the soonest construction could start would likely be the end of 2022. Could take longer than that. Once approval, if an approval does occur, construction will take 18 months or longer. PG&E has estimated that 2024 is a possible time frame that something could be operational. And so just give you a rough estimate of the next steps and the schedule going forward. So nothing has been decided yet, and there's still quite a bit of time left.
All right, so we're entering our Q&A portion here. Just a reminder, everybody's in a listen-only mode right now. Everyone's muted except for Rob and myself and Patrick and Julie. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Put that in quotes. Click on the raise hand icon, and we'll call on you. And also, we'll do our best. There are questions we just won't be able to answer in a presentation like this over Zoom, but we'll do the best we can right now. But if you submit your comments through these methods, and we highly encourage either mail or email. You can do voicemail. It's not, I don't think it's not a preferred way, but I know some of you have already dialed this number and left messages. But here's the email for the project. You can send your emails, your comments there, or you can mail your comments to this address. And again, I think I'm going to just jump ahead for a second. This is the project website. So I'm not going to keep this slide here. Again, if you want this, if you don't already have it, I believe we put it in many of the notices. This slide presentation is available on the project website.
And it's in the chat today. So if you check
it's in the chat as well. So this is where you can find a lot of the information. And in the end, if you're still having trouble finding the project website, just send an email to this address and say, I'm having trouble finding the project website. Where can you give it, and we can provide you with the link. So let's see. We haven't heard from Julie very much so far. Let's see, Julie, how are we doing with Q&A?
We are doing great. We have about 7 open questions right now. So I'm gonna help facilitate this. The first of the questions is from an anonymous attendee. It says, you keep talking about the environmental impact. Why not the human impact? We did not see a chapter on health effects.
That's a good question. So I'll go ahead and take this one first. Interesting thing about CEQA is that it does focus on what is called the physical environment, not the human environment. That's a little bit different than the federal counterpart to the CEQA, which is NEPA, which does put a much higher emphasis on that, quote, human environment. However, we still look at human impacts. We look at impacts to humans from hazards in the hazards chapter. We look at it in the noise chapter with noise impacts. We look at it in the wildfire chapter. So these impacts to humans do come up in the draft EIR in some of the topics. Now, as far as social impacts, those are definitely way outside the bounds of CEQA for the most part. So we don't generally talk about those as much. Okay. And then just a reminder, if you want more of a response or your question isn't answered, you can add an additional question to the Q&A box, or you can click the raise hand button if you'd like to speak. So the next question we got is from David Bulfer. It says, what happens if a proposed route passes over my home? If you have, I don't want to know where you live, but if you have concerns that a proposed route passes over your home, you can certainly provide a letter or provide written comments expressing those concerns to the project email address, or mailing it to the Horizon office in Oakland. Those are ways that you can do it. I can also, if you want to raise your hand, I can let you speak right now, but we'll certainly address whatever comments that you have about a proposed route passing over your home.
And I'll just add, Tom, so the reason we don't want your address is we don't want to make that public during this recorded presentation, but you mentioned passing over your home, and we'd like to know more about that. Send us an email and we can look into the project website map. You could try the interactive map to just check and see how close it actually is to your property or your home. And so we definitely like to hear back from you in a written format. So thank you for the comment.
So
it looks like David has raised his hand.
Yeah, so David has raised his hand, so I'm going to unmute him right now. So David, you should be.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, I just, one of the proposed routes, it's not one of the higher rate proposed routes, higher likelihood to propose routes, but the power lines would be within 50 feet of my home. And is that dangerous? Does that put me at risk?
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of question we'd like to get in writing and make sure we get you a good answer to. And so we'll need to investigate it in a little more detail. So please email us and with your information and send us your address at that time, and we'll look into it.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to mute you, David. Again, if you want to speak again, go ahead and raise your hand again. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised, so let's go back. We've answered that one.
Okay, so Maureen Herrera writes, this is a catastrophe for our neighborhoods. Please use the green northern route, not right through our east side downtown.
Okay, so it looks, if I understand this, it sounds like, Maureen, your concern is about the proposed project, the Aqua Blue project, the alignment that goes along Union Road and then cuts across over into the just southwest of the airport. So if you would like to, we've heard that comment, we've heard you. And if you'd like to formalize that comment, again, please feel free to provide a written comment to us and we can address it in the draft EIR, or sorry, in the final EIR.
Okay, David Wolfer writes, what weight does the environmental impact report have on the overall project? For instance, how does cost come into play in relationship to environment?
A good question. So cost has come up throughout this project, even throughout the CEQA process, even though CEQA itself isn't as focused on cost, we still have taken cost into consideration already. For example, if there are certain alternatives that are just so completely cost prohibitive that we've just said there's no way, and they have been dismissed. Those are what you'd call infeasible based, on for economic reasons. Then cost comes into play. We've already in the draft EIR discussed cost. So if you go to chapter 5, there is some discussion of various costs associated with these different alternatives. And so there is some discussion there. That discussion wasn't required by CEQA. That was something that CPUC wanted to do, again, to really do a good faith at disclosure. When cost, I would say probably most comes into play is during the proceeding phase and when the board, the commissioners actually adopt, choose which, if any, either the proposed project or alternative combinations or nothing is approved. And so they will weigh in cost. I can't speak for the commissioners. I can't speak for the administrative law judge, but I do know that that is something that comes up while they're going through their process.
And Tom, I would just add, so in just for disclosure purposes, we do have rough cost estimates for things like undergrounding and alternative, the entire project. These are in chapter 5. However, it's hard to say what arguments will be made during the formal proceeding, what the scope will be. Cost may come up, but exactly how it would come up is still unclear. And so, cost is not taken into consideration generally as we're looking specifically, I should say, as we're looking at the various alternatives under the environmental review. But how it may come up in the proceeding is it's above our pay grade, I guess you could be willing to say it.
All right.
Okay, so Maureen Herrera writes, what usually happens to the property values for those of us who live on this 7-mile proposed lines of 70 kV poles?
I have no idea. That's definitely not my area of expertise. I'm more of an environmental guy. This would be you could certainly submit this comment to, again, via one of these ways shown on the slide. I certainly don't know the answer to that.
And I'll just add, it's a common question. What is the impact on property value from a construction? However, it's not something that's typically addressed or is addressed in a CEQA review. And so we welcome the comment, and it is one we often get. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have from an anonymous attendee. What studies of the health effects of high voltage lines near or on top of a home can you send us to?
So what I would do to start the response to your comment is I would have you take a look at chapter 2 of the draft EIR. This is the project description chapter. It's a long chapter. It's like 100, it's over 100 pages. But I think if you go to around, I don't know, towards the very end, there will be, I think 5-6 pages or give or take that talks about electromagnetic fields or EMF. And there's a discussion in there about the current knowledge on EMF. The CPUC does not include EMF within its CEQA analysis because right now there's too many unknowns. There's nothing that we really understand about EMF at this point to know whether or not it's an issue or not an issue. And so at the end of chapter 2, we talk about what we do know. And that's described in chapter 2, but that's because it's just such a big unknown. It would be speculative to start talking about what health effects are of high voltage lines.
And Tom, I'll add to that answer. So the PUC has looked at this previously, and so research has already been done. We're not rehashing research on EMFs as part of this environmental review. In section 2.9, I think it's best if I just read the first part of it. So the CPUC does not consider electric and magnetic fields, EMF, to be an environmental issue in the context of CEQA, because there is no agreement among scientists that EMF creates a potential health risk, and because CEQA does not define or adopt standards for defining any potential risk from EMF. And there's quite a bit more information there about EMFs and about the scientific research behind it. There's also some information about methods to reduce EMF that the utilities take, such as how they arrange the cables, the conductors on poles to reduce EMF fields. So it's a good section to look through, and it's a topic we are not reinvestigating as part of the CEQA analysis. It's something that's already been decided at the commission.
All right.
Okay, next, Maureen Herrera writes, yes, I will write something, thank you. And we appreciate that, Maureen. So I think the information is available up and of how you can send that. Next, we have anonymous attendee states, the DEIR section 4.0 states, because the specific characteristics of alternatives BS2 and BS3 are unknown, these alternatives are evaluated for illustrative purposes in the DEIR. Consistent with CEQA guidelines section 15145, no significance conclusions are provided for the alternative BS2 and BS3 impact discussions. Please explain what this means and why batteries are part of the environmentally preferred alternative.
Good question. So I can start this by saying that we included battery storage because it's a proven technology. We feel very confident that it can work in addressing the distribution, at least in part, the distribution objective of this proposed project. We don't know where these battery storage facilities could be. They could be in people's garages. They could be in a business. They could be a separate facility, what we call front of the meter battery storage solutions. These are facilities that could be out, as you're driving. They could be in a parking lot of a strip mall. They could be anywhere. We don't know where they could be. We've come up with example locations for some of these battery storage facilities, but at this point in time, we're not saying it definitely needs to go here or it definitely needs to go there, because there's a lot of input that can come from outside of this whole CEQA review process. People can build, if you wanted to, you could put a battery in your garage tomorrow. There are a lot of potential opportunities here for constructing battery storage facilities, and we didn't want to state anything, specifically like it's going to go here or it's going to go there. We come up with example locations, but we did want to include it as part of the. It's not only part of the environmentally preferred alternative; it's part of all of the alternative combinations. This whole distributed energy component that where you can have battery storage and solar, or even other things like conservation type things that can go with any of these alternative combinations, including the and again, it's the word environmentally the environmentally superior alternative. Yes, it includes battery storage, but so do all of the other alternative combinations.
And Tom, I think we could add that it's unclear if the applicants, one of the applicants would construct the battery storage or other distributed energy resource alternative, or if it could be some third party. There are other proceedings at the commission, such as the distributed resources plans proceeding, or there's a whole process whereby planned investments such as the distribution component of this project are considered for deferral. And in those cases, a third party may make a bid to build a solution which PG&E hasn't considered where to site or how to site, or even the exact technology. Could be energy efficiency. Some, for example, a large facility like a Walmart or a Costco putting in lots of insulation, lowering the overall peak demand, and that is a distributed energy resource. So is battery storage, so is solar. So it was one that we didn't know the exact sites, we just needed to show it was potentially feasible, and we accomplished that in the EAR.
Can you just add a bit from that last question about why there's no significance conclusions?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. So the one other aspect of the question is why there are no significance conclusions, and the reason for that is because when we're doing the impact analysis component of this, because we don't know where these facilities would end up being, it doesn't make sense to do environmental impacts of those facilities because we don't know where they're going. Are they going to be at this intersection? Are they going to be in somebody's garage? Are they going to be at businesses? All of the above? Is it going to be up in the north, in the south? At any of these locations that we identified, or somewhere completely different? So it becomes impossible to do any type of environmental impact analysis when we don't know where the actual facilities will be.
Thanks. And now just to switch over from Q&A to raising of hands, it looks like Doug's been raising his hand. Can we?
Oh, okay.
So he can have an opportunity to speak.
Yes, Doug, I'm going to unmute you now.
Awesome. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for all three of you helping us to better understand what's going on. At the beginning of this, you kind of commented on two goals, and maybe I didn't fully understand. Is it capacity as well as distribution redundancy that they're trying to fulfill?
It's both. I mean, there is a projected capacity issue as you go down the road. Right now, that is not as much of a problem, but there's also this reliability, this redundancy in the grid. Not only
and Tom, let me help with that a little bit. So the capacity need, when I think of the capacity need, I'm thinking of the distribution need. And so originally, when the project was proposed in 2017, there was an application filed. There was a capacity need for the distribution system that has since gone away. And so it's unclear when that would come back. There is also this reliability need. I tend not to use the word redundancy, but it could be used, where you need another 70 kV line to ensure that power is provided to the region in case another 70 kV line is lost, or 70 kV component of the power system. So there is both a transmission component, which you use the word redundancy or reliability, that's that piece. And there's the capacity need, which referred to the distribution need of the project. Does that help, Doug?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. And as you were describing, one of the comments also, or one of the terms that you were using is foreseeable future distribution components of the Estrella substation. If it was to go over to the South River Road, which is what I'm most familiar with and concerned with, if it went to the South River Road option, would that be able to fulfill the requirements of the future distribution components that you described in the Estrella substation?
It could, in combination with the expansion of Templeton substation. So the idea is that the South River Road alternative, it not only includes that new power line that goes north from Templeton and then cuts west along South River Road, but it would also include some additional expansion of the Templeton substation.
And it would result, Doug, in some longer distribution lines, and so to make that work. And in addition, that alternative combination 4, and I'm just looking at the slide here, it includes battery storage. So all of those things combined would result in meeting the distribution need as well.
Gotcha. Thank you again. And one last thing, as you talk about some of the alternatives and things, battery storage being the one that's most prominent, is there a reason why you haven't discussed or thought about thermal storage as well?
No, I'd like to get that comment. We did look at flow batteries, but other options for distributed energy resource, yeah, we can add something more into the final EIR. So please send us that comment. Okay.
Meaning now or meaning in writing?
Meaning in writing. It's going to take a little bit more time, I think, for us to address that one. So yes, please email us.
Sure. And then it's my understanding that from a capacity standpoint, the majority of the need is for us looking at a map further to the north, further north of Paso. Is that correct? Is any of that need on the base, or is it all in the greater northern Paso area and the surrounding small communities up there?
Well, I think if I understand it, as Rob said, the need right now, the capacity, if you're talking about in terms of the distribution need.
Yeah, so there's data that's out right now, which shows that there's only a need in Paso itself for about 0.5 megawatt. And then as you get to Paso and San Miguel area, there's 1 megawatt. And then there's somewhere out there in San Miguel-ish area that is a need for 3.5 megawatts, which is a large reason for this. Yet there isn't clear definition of where that 3.5 megawatts is, and I'm wondering if you happen to know where that is.
So Doug, I'll take this one, Tom, and you're getting into some pretty complicated stuff, and I'm actually excited to respond to you in email because there's information in the distribution resources plans proceeding which you may have had access to. But I'll just say in a nutshell, they're planning for capacity in the distribution planning area as a whole. And power can be transferred and provided in different ways through in that area, which includes Templeton, San Miguel, Paso Robles. And so there is a need at San Miguel that's being looked at currently in another proceeding. And so if some of the numbers you've described, I'm aware of certain megawatt needs that exist. And so I think to give you a really good answer, that's one we definitely want to follow up with you on.
Okay. Thank you so much. Really, again, appreciate the clarity that you're helping give all of us.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mute you, Doug. Again, if you want to speak again, just raise your hand. Julie, where are we?
All right. Our next question is from an anonymous attendee. It says, who would be responsible for the construction of the Templeton substation expansion, PG&E or Horizon West?
I don't know the answer to that question. Rob?
Yeah, I mean, PG&E owns the substation and operates it, and how it would be expanded. So just looking at the proposed project, Horizon West would own and operate the high side. So that's the 230 kV side of the substation, whereas PG&E would own and operate the lower side, which includes the 70 kV side and the distribution components if those were to be built. So how that would break down at Templeton, I'm assuming Horizon West would still have a piece of that project, but I don't know specifically offhand today. And so that's something we'd want to get back to you on and maybe check with the applicants on to give you the right answer.
Well, that would be a good comment to submit in writing.
The next comment is from Barbara Springer. She writes, if the River Road alternative is ranked 6th, can it still be selected? If yes, under what circumstances?
It's a good question. I'll take the first crack at this and Rob may jump in here. So the South River Road alternative combination is ranked 6, which means it is the most environmentally impactful of all of the alternative combinations. Can it still be selected? It could. Under what circumstances? Well, at some point, what the commission would need to do is probably provide an explanation for why none of the other more favorable combinations were selected. So it would start with, like, we didn't select combination number 1 for the following reasons. We didn't select number 2 for the following reasons. 3, they would basically go all the way up that ranking system. Rob?
Yeah, I think that's a good response, Tom. And I will say that, you know, the analysis we've done is not in any way determinant of what will be selected. So I describe it as a menu of options. We have the 6 different alternative combinations with the proposed project at 6. And so any of those could ultimately be selected. However, as Tom said, you sort of start at the top of the list and work your way down as to why this one wasn't selected for whatever reason and the next. So with that in mind, South River Road is at the bottom of the pile currently for the draft EIR.
Okay, and our next comment is from an anonymous attendee. It says, would expanding the Templeton substation satisfy the redundancy and reliability issue?
It would, if you also, in addition to expanding the Templeton substation, you included the alignment that is part of the South River Road alternative combination, as well as battery storage. So it's not just expanding Templeton substation by itself. You would need to also put in that alignment that goes up from Templeton substation and then cuts across South River Road.
And I'll add, we did have PG&E and Horizon West provide a fairly detailed, actually very detailed response to that question, giving us a sample design and layout of a Templeton expansion to make sure that it was something that was potentially feasible, meeting those project objectives, and so we could carry it forward.
Okay, and we have another anonymous attendee comment that says, can you confirm the height of the 70 kV poles?
I don't have that information off the top of my head. If you submit that comment in writing, we certainly can provide an answer in the final EIR. I just don't have very detailed information like that at the ready here during this presentation.
It looks like Doug is raising his hand again. I don't know if that was from previous or if Doug would like to speak. Oh,
you want to do the anonymous attendee first, and so
sure. Yeah. So the next comment we've gotten is from an anonymous attendee. Where would we find the PG&E info on the expansion of the Templeton substation?
I'm not sure by what is meant by the PG&E info. We have a lot of information about the alternatives, including the expansion of Templeton substation. If you're really looking for a lot of information, you could either check Chapter 3 of the draft EIR or the final alternative screening report, which is an appendix to the draft EIR. There's also there's a lot of other information on the project website, but I would probably start there with Chapter 3 of the draft EIR, as well as the alternative screening report.
Yeah, just to add to that, so Chapter 3 is the description of Templeton. So it has a description of the alternative. And Chapter 4 is the chapter where there's the environmental analysis of resource topics, and that includes by resource topic and analysis for Templeton Substation for that particular resource. So moving to our next question. This is from David Bolfer. Why isn't undergrounding used more in the environmental impact report?
Well, there are a few reasons. One, undergrounding has its own impacts. It's not impact free. The moment you start digging trenches, that can cause impacts. Cultural resources, biological resources, noise, air emissions. Before you know it, you start having impacts associated. It doesn't seem like you would, because all you're doing is trenching, or you're doing underground horizontal boring or something. But there are impacts associated with that. And so there's, a certain limit to which you're saying, does it make sense to do undergrounding for the whole alignment? Undergrounding is very expensive. It's a lot more expensive than overhead lines. And so that plays a factor in this as well. So we didn't come up with an undergrounding alternative for, let's say, an entire power line, transmission line.
And I think that is all the open, that answers all the open questions, and it doesn't look like any other hands are raised at this time. Oh, just got another one from an anonymous attendee. Why is undergrounding being looked at for some areas and not others?
So Tom, I'll take a piece of this. I think one thing we could add to your prior comment is we looked at the proposed project, which was for overhead lines. And to address what would be a significant impact on aesthetics, we come up with an undergrounding alternative. But we're only implementing that alternative in an area where there otherwise would be a significant impact. And so had the applicant proposed an entirely underground route, that would be their proposal, but it wasn't. It was an overhead route. And so that's a piece of the response.
That's a very good point, Rob, and that explains, that is also the answer here. Why is undergrounding being looked at for some areas and not others? Is when we're looking at these, again, the purpose of alternatives in an EIR is to find an alternative way to meet the project objectives, and at the same time reduce some of the significant impacts associated with the proposed project. And so one way of reducing aesthetic impacts of the proposed project is to underground the lines in areas where there's a high level of aesthetic sensitivity to the local area, for people that live in that local area. Is there looks like we have a, okay.
Yes, so the next question is from an anonymous attendee. It says, why is undergrounding being looked at? Oh, sorry, that was our last one.
That's the last one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it just looks like there's some additional comments. Okay.
There are some additional comments by a commenter speculating on why undergrounding is being looked at some areas and not others. We don't get in when we look, our group, Rob and his team, which includes us, when we're looking at impacts, we're looking at the impacts, the significant impacts, and how can we come up with alternatives to minimize those impacts. And that's really the driver. If we looked at undergrounding way out in a relatively rural setting along parts of these alignments, that wouldn't make any sense because we're not reducing any significant impact. There is no aesthetic impact as defined under CEQA for a power line out in a relatively rural area with very few people around. And so it wouldn't make sense to come up with an alternative that includes undergrounding for that portion of the alignment. If the, as Rob said, if the applicants proposed undergrounding for the whole alignment, well, that's one thing, but that wasn't proposed.
Okay. Our next comment or question from an anonymous attendee states, would the transmission lines replace the current wood distribution lines, or would they both stay up?
Well, they would both, those are two different lines serving two different purposes. So a transmission line would not replace a distribution line. If you're wondering if, I'm not sure how else to read this. What would the
Yeah,
I'm not sure if it's true on, all areas of the line. This may be one we want to get back to with more detail, exactly, so we know exactly where this person is asking about. Because there may be areas where the underbuild is created on the 70 kV line. I'm not certain, but let's get back to them in writing on that one.
Yeah, I would prefer, I know that you submitted another question here. In the case of the South River Road, there would be poles running along both sides of the road. Not that I'm aware of. But if you want to submit your comment in writing, we certainly will respond to it in the EIR. The final EIR.
Okay. We have another question from David Bolfer, who writes, there are many homes very close to South River Road. It is possible that section could be underground versus doing it overhead. Like, is it possible that a section of the South River Road could be underground versus doing it overhead?
It's possible. That's not an alternative that we looked at, of undergrounding that particular alternative, the South River Road alternative. It's possible. I think that, I'd have to go back and look at the aesthetic impacts in particular for the South River Road, but my guess is that the amount of undergrounding that would be needed would be fairly considerable. But again, if you want to submit these comments in writing, please do. We will respond to them in writing in the final EIR.
Right, and for that kind of comment, we'd probably check with the applicants and get a better understanding of the challenges involved with undergrounding in that stretch. There may be numerous ones.
Right. All right, anybody have any questions? We've got an open field here. Anybody want to speak? Raise your hand. Doug raised his hand. Doug, I am going to, you are able to speak.
All right, can you hear me again?
Yeah, I hear you.
All right, perfect. Just again over process that you're going through. So as you're enlightening all of us, and as we have our questions and we're going to write our letters or communicate through you of the questions and concerns that we have, do you then, if anything is is highlighted or changed in your minds about how you report, is that what happens next? Do you modify your report as it goes in?
Potentially. Yeah, we potentially might, you know, depending on what the comment is or what comments are made, there could be revisions made to the draft EIR. At a minimum, we'll have written responses to the comments.
Gotcha. Perfect. Appreciate it again. Just trying to understand the process.
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and mute you. And then again, if you want to speak, go ahead and raise your hand again. So we have no questions right now. We have no hands raised. So it's, again, open.
We could say you're welcome to Barbara.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara.
Yes, no, you're welcome.
We hope it's been helpful.
And send us feedback, constructive criticism or positive, whatever. We haven't done this before for our secret public meetings. It's a first for all of us. So we'd like to know how it went. We have heard back from some, they liked it better. Maybe it was more convenient. But for other reasons, if it's been challenging, let us know.
Yeah, this is, I've never done anything like this before. I've led many public meetings for decades, but I've never done this before. So today marks a new thing for me to do a Zoom meeting here. It's a lot of information for somebody who's not a young person.
I mean, Tom, you've done a great job with Zoom. I guess now the second time, I mean, good job, man.
I've got a new calling here after all these years. Forget SQL. I'm now going to be a Zoom person. And David says, great meeting and information for all of us. This was the first PLC meeting we've ever been to, and it was awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you, David. I appreciate that. All right, take care, Doug. Our Q&A board is open. We don't have any hands raised.
I'm kind of surprised. I thought tonight we would have more attendees, but it was closer to, what was it, closer to 50?
It was close. It was close to 50. It was in the mid 40s, Julie, right? And so I think the evening people tended to attend the noon meeting. And again, just for anybody who joined late, we're recording this. We're gonna do the best that we can to figure out if we can get this up onto the project website, these recordings. And that's a process that involves getting it up on the CPUC's YouTube channel and then somehow creating a way to have it on the project website. So we're going to look at all of that. I don't know how that will all work, but we'll do the best we can. What we can say is,
I'm optimistic. I think it's going to work, although the file size is really large.
Yeah, we can figure out. These are huge files. You can't believe how big these files are. But we're going to do the best that we can. And at least for now, the slides are up on the website. And we're going to do everything that we can to get a link up there so that people actually want to watch these they can do it again. But in case, I think more importantly, as people have raised, that in the event that somebody was unable to attend one of these meetings, that they could watch it.
I'm curious how it went for the call-in users as opposed to those who were able to sign on. I wonder, maybe we'll get a comment to that effect.
That would be interesting. If anybody, we do have some people who have dialed in by phone. Let us know how this worked, if it worked at all. If it was, if you don't have a video feed, it's probably harder to follow along, especially given a presentation like this that has so many figures. Well, I'm sensing a lull here.
So again, we're at the point in the meeting, if we're just kind of hanging on here for any possible last questions. So anyone who has maybe joined, I'm not sure if the number went up from 13 to 14 attendees or not, or maybe I'm imagining things.
It's dropped down. Quite a few people have dropped off.
Well, I've never noticed that.
I can't put up that final slide again. I think everyone probably has this project website. And sorry, it splits over into 2 lines, but it's kind of a long, what they call a URL. So a long URL, but it gets you there.
Well, Tom, I'm thinking maybe we just give it a minute and kind of wrap up here. I think for those who are hanging on, they're probably thinking they'd be happy if we wrapped up so they can get back to dinner or whatever it is.
How long are these people gonna hang on? So I think we'll go ahead and start wrapping up here. I want to thank everybody who participated in this. It certainly was very helpful to get the questions that you raised. Thanks for your patience as we kind of work through this technology of Zoom. This was the first day that I've ever done anything like this. So, and hopefully it worked out. We'll do the best that we can to get these videos up on the website. But for sure, the comment period is still open. As you know, it's going to be open until February 1st. So feel free to submit comments on the draft EIR, and we will provide written responses in the final EIR. And other than that, from a project standpoint, as far as if you're wondering, is there anything else that's going to be happening on this side, the CPUC's CEQA team side with respect to this project? Not at the moment. We're sort of in this is a pause as we go through the public comment period. And so once we close the public comment period, we will start pulling together all of the comments that we've received in writing and start writing responses to those comments. And that'll all be in the final EIR. So that's about all. I hope everyone has a very safe, healthy, and happy holiday break here coming up, and a happy new year. And we look forward to receiving any comments that you might have on the draft EIR.
Have a good evening, and thank you for attending tonight.
All right, take care. We're going to go ahead and stop.